Well, ever since the Civil War, the idea of reparations for African Americans has been discussed, even attempted. And the debate continues nearly 160 years later. Now it is the topic of a 1-hour documentary on PBS and WQED here in Pittsburgh called The Cost of Inheritance, an America Reframed special. Joining us are the documentary's executive producer, Daryl Ford Williams, and associate producer, Iris Sampson. Welcome, ladies, to Intersections.
Thank you. Thank you.
So, I did have a chance to watch the documentary, and I felt like, okay, there's a lot here that I didn't know. And you were saying you were learning as you were going along as well. Kind of what were some of the things that you were learning about this history that maybe you didn't know before?
You know, one of the key things that surprised me was to learn how many initiatives had happened years ago, really at the start of the Emancipation Proclamation and through Reconstruction to address the inequity in the lives of people who had been enslaved. So I didn't know some of those early stories. I didn't know that there were some really fearless Black women that launched those efforts during Reconstruction and almost succeeded.
Yeah. So how did this whole thing kind of come about?
So this came about as a partnership with the University of Michigan Center for Social Solutions, and I had been in talks with them for, probably the past 4 to 5 years about their interest in academic pursuits around slavery and its aftermath. And they sought a grant and received a grant from the Andrew Mellon Foundation to fund 9 universities to do academic work around reparations and to create a documentary for PBS. And that part was for us to do, to deliver to PBS. And so the two ends are really separate. There is academic work that is happening, but then there was the creation of this documentary that really needed to be made for a broad audience that might have no academic background on reparations. And so to talk about this in kind of everyman terms so that everyone could understand what the issue is.
Yeah. So, I was talking, with you guys earlier, as you were working on this project, was there anything that was unexpected or that you found surprising?
I was surprised to learn that the United States has provided reparations for other populations before that have been wronged and that have basically done nothing to rectify the situation for the specific population. Japanese Americans received compensation when they were interned during World War II. Native Americans, they're in talks about getting some reparations for them over various land loss, children that were put in boarding schools. But the Black population has basically been ignored for probably from 1619 on. And I was shocked that other populations seem to get redress, but how could a whole history go unanswered?
Yeah. Well, the one thing I thought was also interesting as I was watching is that there were individual people who were doing things on their own that pretty much would constitute a reparation. Was that surprising for you, Daryl, to see that there were just individual people out there who said, you know what, I'm going to pay someone's college tuition, or I'm going to help these people get their land, things like that?
Yeah, surprising and uplifting to know that not only are they doing it, but they are spreading the word with other white allies that this is a history that should be reckoned with, that this is part of responsible citizenship. And so what it brings it down to is not a federal policy change, but a one-on-one. How do we understand each other as people? How do we recognize inequities that should not exist? And what can we do about it today?
So many other countries have really gone through a whole reconciliation process, but this country really hasn't to that degree. Is there a healing process you think that could come out of something? or what does it take? Or do you have thoughts on what do you think could happen maybe in the future?
Yeah, I do. I think that this is a conversation starter. This documentary does not pretend to come up with answers. It is not an advocacy documentary. It is for enlightenment. It is for education on the topic. And I think that what it calls upon people to do is to think about the selectiveness with which we associate our histories. You know, we often seek to identify as being descendants of founding fathers or descendants of, you know, people who formed this country, but we don't choose to recognize the responsibility for the inequities that happened back then. We choose to identify with the virtue, but not the troubling history. And so what I'm hoping is that we come to a point where we can start having honest conversations about how this country was formed and the divide, the trajectory of our various lives that creates a divide that exists today.
Yeah. Well, it is definitely interesting, and we want to let people know that they can see it. It's going to be on, it is going to air on Monday, January 8th at 10 p.m. It's The Cost of Inheritance, an America Reframed special, 10 p.m. on PBS and WQED. Ladies, thank you so much for being with us, and I look forward to hearing more.
Thank you.
All right. And I'll have my final word when we come back.